define strategy. What is strategy in very simple terms?
Well, in very simple terms, it's what's going to make a particular organization different and provide a competitive advantage. Basically, competition is destructive when companies are basically competing on the same thing. That forces competition to gravitate to price. Strategy is finding a different way to compete to create a different sort of value for the customer, which allows a company to prosper, to achieve superior profitability.
What is not strategy?
Simply implementing best practices, buying the latest machine, using the internet to communicate with your customers. There are lots of things that managers do that they have to do to actually keep making the company more productive and more efficient, and to attain the kind of latest technology and knowledge about management. All those things are a necessity, but they're not strategy. Strategy is not about doing the same thing better. Strategy is about finding that different place for the organization to deliver value. But what makes it challenging is you have to do both of these things at the same time. You got to keep assimilating best practices, but at the same time having real clarity about what's going to make you different.
You wrote a book 25 years ago that has remained at the top of the list of the strategy books. What were the key messages in that book?
Well, I've written a number of books about strategy. I think my first really major book on strategy was a book called Competitive Advantage, and I think the really major message of that was really how to look at the industry in which you compete and how to think about what causes industry profitability and how, by understanding that, a company can improve its own position. In that book, I introduced the so-called 5 forces framework, that in any industry you've got to look at the power of the customer, the power of the supplier, the barriers to entry, the threat of substitute products, and the nature of the rivalry itself, and that those 5 forces collectively define really the profit potential of any business. And this was, I think, a breakthrough in the field, because really we had no systematic way of looking at industries. The next book was a book called Competitive Advantage, in which I really talked about how to look at a company's own position and introduce the concept of the value chain. Any company, when it competes, is simply conducting a lot of activities, marketing activities, procurement activities, service activities, and so forth. And the value chain provided a framework for understanding how a particular company was competing versus its competitors, and therefore sharpening the distinctions in terms of its position. I think if I had to sort of highlight the major concepts that have made my work relatively enduring, it would be some of those ideas.
Interesting. And after 30 years, what has changed? Is everything relevant, or have things evolved?
Well, I've always focused not on the specifics of how a particular industry operates or a particular company competes. I've always been looking at really the deep fundamental underpinnings of competition. So, of course, industries are very different today than they were 30 years ago. We're much more global, there's different technology, things move at different speed, but actually the same 5 forces still determine profitability. It's still the power of the customer, the power of the supplier. So I think in some sense everything has changed, but at least from my point of view, very little has changed, in the sense that the enduring fundamentals of industry structure and the value chain and the importance of price and cost in determining superior performance, the distinction between operational effectiveness and positioning, all those things are what I would say are really competitive fundamentals that are timeless. And then at any given moment in history, the weights, if you will, or the specifics are constantly evolving.